Welcome to Get the Balance Right, a podcast for creative entrepreneurs who challenge the status quo. I'm your host, Heather Zeitzwolfe, and I'm on a mission to help and inspire visionaries to grow their firms with a keen focus on their triple bottom line. Join me for conversations with purpose-driven leaders, business disruptors, CEOs, and renegades in digital media, marketing, advertising, and design. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Get the Balance Right podcast. I am your host, Heather Zeitzwolfe. Okay, today we're going to start something different. I have had people tell me, hey, why don't you appear more on the podcast? Why aren't you doing solo shows? Yeah, why aren't I doing solo shows? That's a good question. Well, I'd have to say that one, kind of makes me nervous, makes me uncomfortable to think about that, but I am ready to get outside of my comfort zone and kind of try it out. I think my reservations about not doing it are around like this thought of, well, what I have to say, are people really that interested in? You know, it goes back to that whole like imposter syndrome and all that stuff. Well, I have to keep telling myself, you know, Heather, you've been around a long time and you've been involved in a lot of stuff. You have a lot of experience. So I guess I have something to say. I hope you guys agree. So I'm going to start talking more in this show. On today's show, we do have a guest, Michelle Kaplan, and I'm going to get to that in a little while. But I'm not doing a solo show today. I'm just going to kind of ease into it, if you know what I mean. So that means I'm just going to do a little bit more on the intro section, and then we'll go to my guest. All right. So what are we talking about this week? Well, I thought it would be interesting to talk about reflecting back on 2020. I know, right? 2020, we've had enough of that year. But it is always a great way to learn what to do in the next year, to look back on what we did in the prior year. So I've got a way to do this that is fun. It can be fun if you are a solopreneur or if you have a team. This is an exercise that's really great for teams. So imagine that you have a whiteboard. You can do it on a whiteboard. You can do it on a piece of butcher paper, if you can find butcher paper. I'm not agreeing with butchers. Let me just say that. But butcher paper is okay. So you take one of these things, butcher paper or a whiteboard. You can do this digitally, but you make 4 quadrants. Each quadrant is going to be an L word. In one corner is liked. The next one is learned. The other one is lacked. And the fourth one is long for. And sometimes this is called a 4Ls retrospective. I'm just going to call it 4Ls. Here's the deal. What you want to do is look back at the prior year, and it could be the entire year of 2020. It could be the last quarter. You could think about it as, okay, we're going into quarter one. Maybe you want to be reflective of last year's quarter one. Whatever you want to do. You're just going to kind of look back. So say, for instance, I'm in accounting. We have tax season. So I could look at my prior year tax season and do a 4L on that going into this year's tax season. It's got a lot of possibilities. All right. So here's the thing. When you put down what you liked about whatever time that you're reflecting, that's usually the easiest one because you can think about like, oh yeah, I really liked when this happened, or I like this client, or, you know, I like this system that we put in place, or whatever it is. Now, the liked section is going to be the easiest, of course. I want you to think, if you are a solopreneur, be really honest with yourself while you're doing this exercise. But if you have a team, you really want to get your team involved. Now, they're going to find it very easy to put what they liked, I'm sure. That's just how it is. It's just people are, you know, they're ready to give compliments, brag a little bit, that sort of thing. But what you want to do is make sure that everybody has input. So if this requires people being anonymous on your team, then let them answer these questions anonymously, but you have to get everybody involved. Otherwise, you're just going to have someone like me that's a big mouth that's just going to dominate the whole thing. Okay, so liked. In one of these quadrants, you now put what we've liked from that retrospective time. Then the next section is learned. This is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, because we want to kind of talk about the things that maybe we made mistakes on, or maybe something that was kind of uncomfortable along the way, but we stretched ourselves and learned. Obviously, I'm learning right now. I'm doing this solo-ish show, and I'm doing it off the cuff, and I'm learning. And it's not going to be the greatest, but you guys can forgive me, right? This is my first time doing this. All right, so you put in what you've learned. Now, it's starting to get harder. In the next quadrant, you're going to put lacked. Oh, this is what we lacked. This is where the self-reflecting piece comes in. That's tough. And if you are working with a team, you want to make sure that you are offering them a really safe space, a place where honesty is rewarded. So if they say something that was lacked, and it could be, if you're the boss, it could be something that you're lacking, you have to be ready for this feedback. So just make sure that it's a really comfortable place for everybody. Now, if you are a solopreneur, you've got to dig deep and be honest with yourself what lacked. Maybe you needed to take a course in something because you did not know something, or maybe you did not get all the sales. Maybe you need to dig in why that was. Whatever it is, you can figure it out if you're honest with yourself. Now, quadrant 4, longed for. This one can be the one that is actually kind of, I don't know, you can stretch yourself. It kind of can be like that genie in the bottle kind of thing. Like, oh, I wish we had this in the office. I wish we had a kombucha on tap in the office, or whenever anyone's working in an office. I don't know. But what you long for, this is where you kind of have to reel it in and make sure that people are actually being realistic, because you don't want them to say like, I long for a 4-week holiday in the Bahamas. Like, you as the boss are not going to provide that. So it's got to be something realistic. So longed for could be that they want to have more flexibility in time. Okay, well, you know what? They got that in 2020. Obviously, they were on 24-hour flex time. So it could be that maybe they longed for being reimbursed for having a home office, something like that. Whatever they come up with, you have to kind of, like I said, go through and make sure, is this realistic? Is this something you can provide? Is this something that should be discussed? And you want to look for things that are common things in this one for sure. Okay, then what I would recommend is you compile all the data and see if there's any trends within that. Take a long, hard look at everything and see what you can learn from the prior year and what you can either change, modify, or if they were good things, then you want to amplify them in 2021. Now, I know 2020 was a weird year, so it's not going to be the normal year, but that's going to guide you even further with an exercise like this, because you do want to look for the things that are anomalies. We're not over this thing yet, so it's not like everything's going to automatically change just because it's a new year. So keep all of these things in mind. Like I said, you can do this on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard. You can also use an online tool. I like Miro. I actually have an affiliate link down in the show notes if you want to use that. And they actually have a template right now that's free that you can use. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. All right. My guest today on the show, I'm joined by Michelle Kaplan. She is known as a corporate poet. What? What is a corporate poet? Well, you're going to find out. She has approximately 30 years of experience in HR and 15 years as a professional development trainer and coach. Now, Michelle's approach to coaching is completely non-conventional because she brings her own twist in by incorporating poetry and creativity along with her training. Whether it's with entrepreneurs or their teams, she helps these business leaders who are struggling with challenges such as decision fatigue, retention issues, workplace issues such as performance, interpersonal conflicts, and communication. She's also written 2 poetry books. One is called And the other is called Burst and Flourish, which is more recent. Her poetry actually has been notably recognized on Amazon as the #1 hot new release for inspirational poetry. On this show, we will discuss her unique perspective that is a result from her background in HR combined with her passion for creativity and her innate intuition. We also dive into the topic of poetry at work, why art matters in business, and how creating outside the lines can positively impact the bottom line. Ooh, I like me some bottom line. All right, here is my interview with Michelle Kaplan. Michelle Kaplan, welcome to Get the Balance Right podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
People can't see it, but you are wearing a wonderful zebra print top.
Yes, I was reading a lot of information about you and all the great work you do, and I just channeled it today. I was kind of like, I need to wear something that felt like Heather. Thank you so much.
It looks totally like me, totally. I'd probably add some hot pink leg warmers to that outfit.
That's great.
For the folks in the audience that don't know who you are, Michelle, can you tell a little bit about yourself and can you explain what you mean by being a corporate poet?
So a little bit about myself. So my background is human resources with leadership development, and I do write my own original poetry. So for years, I've been working in organizations as a human resources executive, really focused on organizational effectiveness. Recently, though, I've gone on my own, and I have my own firm called Burst and Flourish, and I focus on training and coaching. I work with leaders. Really, the vision of the company is to create an environment in all the different workplaces where it's safe to just be yourself, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So what I mean by that is that a lot of times, like with companies, the root cause of a lot of performance issues and retention issues are really around people holding back. Some companies I work with about people when they make a mistake, is it okay to do that? Or can I really share what I really think about that decision in a meeting? So that's the kind of things that I work on with different leaders and companies. The corporate poet title was bestowed upon me by a client of mine, and I loved it. That's how these things usually happen. And what he was recognizing is really how I integrate all my HR experience and knowledge with my leadership coaching and my training, because I also do instructor-led trainings, and incorporating my poetry as a tool for self-discovery, for self-development as a leader, and to solve organizational issues.
I see. Whenever I do brainstorming, I've talked about brainstorming a lot on this show, but I always try to make it a safe space. There's no bad ideas. Just put your ideas out there. So is that kind of what your corporate poetry is sort of like? Can you explain that a little bit further?
That's a great point. Yes, that's definitely part of it, creating that safe space. Probably example is a good way to explain how I incorporate it. It was actually took me by surprise. I was living a very separate life where I was doing the 9 to 5 or more hours in a corporate setting for years. I have a daughter that I raised on my own, so I'm busy with her. And then I'd wake up at the wee morning hours to write, to do something creative. That was like my outlet for years. What happened, I was writing and it was like something I didn't share with others. And one day I was called into a company. I didn't know these two. And these were two executives who ran large departments in the same company. They weren't getting along. First, it was like a personality issue. And then what was happening is their animosity was really impacting their teams. And so now you're getting into the performance of the company, right? So now I'm called in to say, hey, Michelle, can you figure this out? What is happening here? For years, I've always focused on trust. And trust is obviously important with safety. But I realized how safety comes before trust. That, which kind of makes sense when you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like the safety security is at the bottom before you go up to self-actualize. So I'm in this meeting with these two executives and it's really not going well. They're really digging their heels in, like really deep, like this one's right. And he had all his facts and data. And then the other one would speak and he had all his facts and data. And I felt, okay, this story I think has been told a few times. So I'm sitting there after about a half hour, really not sure about where to go with it, but wanted to create the safety. And there was a part of me, that small voice inside me that was saying, read a poem that I wrote. And I just had written a poem the day before. And it was a very personal poem about myself and my daughter. It was still handwritten in my planner. And my brain was like, no, I'm not reading. No, I'm not. That's like my separate life. But I really got a very strong knowing to read it. And that's part of the work I do, is working with folks to really access and strengthen their intuition. Because even when it doesn't make sense, you just start learning to trust it. So I trust it. I've learned. So I've said to them, is it okay if I read you a poem that I wrote? I felt like I was 5, right? They were so relieved to switch the topic and get out of like whatever they were in, that they were like, please, yes, Of course. And if it's okay, I want to it's a short poem, but this is the poem that I read these two men, and it's called Wordless. As soon as I picked her up from school, I knew something was wrong. My sweet, loving daughter, who usually greets me with a running hug, was quiet, forlorn, eyes downcast. She waited until we got home to bare her soul. She was left out, excluded from playing with the group. It hurts. I know. I had a similar day. Why do they do that? She whispers. I look into her big, beautiful eyes brimming with tears. I wish I could tell her the many reasons, all of which have nothing to do with her, but she wouldn't understand. I wish I could tell her something reassuring. It'll stop when she gets older, but I don't, because that's not true. Right now, in this moment, what does she need most from me? Instinctively, I slide over to her side of the couch, scoop her up in my arms and hug her tightly, tears streaming down my face now as well. We hold on to each other for dear life, for some time, taking in each other's essence. Sometimes there are just no words.
That's very beautiful.
So I read that and it got really quiet. These two were arguing, got really quiet, and I could tell they were processing, so it's okay. And then one spoke after a few minutes and was kind of like, yeah, I don't really do that with you. And he repeated the line that I kept hearing in my head. I was hearing the poem, but he repeated the line, the one that you said, like, right now in this moment, what does she need most from me? And it changed. What I sat in awe is that it changed the entire conversation. It really got them out of their heads and into their hearts, and to really be more of take a step back, a broader perspective about what's happening here. And it flowed. I didn't really even say much. I was just like listening and watching the two for another hour. And I'm not a miracle worker. They're not the best of friends, but they can work together. They can be respectful. And they really put the whole animosity thing to rest and create that safe environment for others.
Wow, that's very nice. But so no air hugs, no actual hugs.
No, but it was, what was so nice was like, it's like the whole, like the vibe, just like something like a vacuum came in and just sucked all the negativity out. And that was where I was driving home from that meeting of like, what was that? And that's how that corporate poet got formed, because I realized I'm going to stop separating because I didn't feel safe.
Hey there, this is Heather. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And if you are, if you wouldn't mind, please hit the subscribe button now. That way you'll never miss an episode. All right, now back to the podcast.
A lot of times when they talk about psychological safety at work, the best definition I've heard of it is really that it's rewarded vulnerability. And I love that in those two words. You know, poets love words. So we just like, oh, that's perfect, that little phrase. And it's really what you're offering. And I realized how I was not really being I didn't feel safe in a corporate setting of a poet. We have a poet. Like, what is that? And I still love it. Now I just get a kick out of it because I'm okay with it. But in the beginning, I really held back, and I don't anymore. So I just really blend it all together.
Okay, so you're taking your experience in HR and then your experience writing poetry, and you're mashing it up together to form this new thing that I've never heard of before. I mean, I have 2 business degrees. I've never heard of anything quite like this. Probably the closest thing I've heard of is maybe like art therapy. So is it similar to art therapy in a way, or is it completely different?
That's a great question, Heather, because it really doesn't matter what the form of art is, whether it's more traditional from dance, music, art, writing, those types of things, to I sometimes see people so creative even from a work aspect. But what I really appreciate now is how creative expression, even when you do it at home, even when you don't want to mesh it together, some people want it separate, and it's okay. Someone had told me once, an artist who paints, he said, if you paint on your own and you just want to do it for your own self-enjoyment, then you just go do it. But when you share it with others, you just have to be open to whatever feedback, criticism. It's very subjective, and you just really have to be okay with that. But the creative expression, even outside of work, we bring our whole selves to work. I just feel it really brings innovation into the workplace and really dealing with like risk and change. And it really creates that environment where it's like a whole diversity of not just from a demographic perspective, but of thought as well. So it can be, I use poetry, but it could be any artistic expression.
So when you come into an office to help out, are you mainly working with the leaders there, or do you also work with the staff too?
I come in all different ways. A lot of times an individual leader, I'll coach one-on-one, and then he or she will really like the work and say, you got to bring this to my organization. Sometimes I go into an organization and kind of do a training. I do instructor-led. Now it's more virtual, obviously, than in person. And then from there, I start coaching folks individually. It really depends on the company. I work with all sizes, but I work with clients that have anything from 3 or 4 employees to large organizations.
The poetry aspect of it, do people actually create poetry while they work with you, or are you reading them your poetry? How does that play out?
I get a sense of that. It's definitely the reading. It's really a tool for creating a safe environment. When poetry is really the experience of us, it's really a storyteller, and it's using a personal stories to really reflect universal themes. So people really identify with it. And just like the example I gave, you need your analytical reason. We need that. But what I really work with clients on a lot, and sometimes they do, some people don't want to write poetry, and then that's okay. So it's really more the reading of it. But through the poetry as a tool, I help my clients identify what is coming up a lot, especially with the intuition piece. Is that the voice of fear? Is it the voice of reason, or is that intuitiveness, that kind of inner guidance kind of wisdom? The short answer is fear is that big screaming, type of thing. Reason is like your indoor voice. It's very polite and nice. And the intuitive is the quiet whisper. You got to get a little quiet to hear it. And it's hard to do. I still struggle with this day where I get an intuitive knowing and then you're like, that makes no sense. But I've just learned to trust if you can diagnose properly, because even fear can be intuitive. A lot of times, the most common question I get is, what about this whole gut instinct thing? Can you learn to be intuitive? And I guess the short answer is yes, but the more accurate answer is that you already are. You are intuitive. Everybody is. It's just a matter of accessing it. It's like a muscle, like anything else. You got to use it. So the gut instinct, sometimes fear will be intuitive. There could be a real danger, and then you need to hold back. And then sometimes it's just illogical, limiting belief stuff that just holds us back.
How can business leaders that want to incorporate this into maybe helping out their staff or utilizing it maybe in some sort of training, how can they use this idea of using art to help make a safer working environment?
It's really through the tangible, because poetry and art is really, you're taking these intangible feelings and putting them into form. I find the best way is that a lot of times we deal with real issues. So we'll take some type of disruption that's happening within their environment, or a lot of times leaders will reach out and they're really, especially now with this work environment where they have to make so many decisions so quickly. How many times have we heard that there's no predictableness to all of this? And they have to make these really key decisions. That's a lot of times where they'll call me. I need to talk this out, Michelle, because I have limited information and I really need to tune in more to that inner guidance. I want to make sure I'm reading this right, so I make the right decisions for myself, for my employees, and for the company.
I work with a lot of people that are creative entrepreneurs, people that are in the marketing space. When they create something, it's usually judged in some way. If it's a piece of artwork, you're going to sell it. It's going to be worth a certain amount of money. Or if you're producing an ad, it's got to generate so many leads or sales. This is a completely different way of looking at artwork. It's not about selling. How does it work? You're putting something out there. You're being creative. You don't want to be judged. It seems like when you do create something from yourself, you always have that feeling like people are going to judge you.
I always say that all of us really are artists because life is art. With the folks listening, if you are actually like your job is to be creative like that. Yeah, of course, there's going to be difference of opinions and judgments and things like that. But the safety comes in. I mean, I love creative types because they're not risk averse. It's really innovative, like cutting edge stuff. You really have to get into a different place where it's more perspective. But as long as the environment is safe, where you can just put it all out there, because usually what happens when I love being in a room with creatives, because it's like this person speaks up. And then whatever you presented, it becomes so much better and transformed because everybody had their input. If you work in an environment where it's really cutthroat, that's hard. That isn't really a safe work environment. Maybe you just get used to it.
Hey, entrepreneur, are you stressing out over your cash flow? Are you always confused by your bank balance? Well, you know what? You're not alone. Lots of business owners struggle with this, but you don't have to. I'm Heather Zeitzwolfe. Besides being a podcast host, I'm also a CPA. I can help you get your cash flow under control so that it's predictable and so you're profitable. Learn how by setting up a discovery call with me now. All you have to do is click the link in the show notes. All right, now back to the show. Using this system, it's like a non-judgmental way of opening up ideas, it seems.
Yes, to use it in more like layman terms, it's really poetry, and really, I believe all art is a tool for emotional intelligence. When we think of emotional intelligence, which really our ability, it legitimizes feelings and emotions in the workplace, which creatives are all a lot of sensory feelers and things like that. Because it's really the short answer of emotional intelligence is really our ability of self-awareness, monitoring our emotions and being aware of the emotions of others. So I always say to people, is a great example when people are like, well, what exactly is emotional intelligence? I'll ask a question and says that, tell me who in your company, who do you work with that just knows how to get things done, get it through and approved? And they'll be like, oh, Jennifer. And I'm like, how does she know? That's emotional intelligence. It's like that kind of organizational agility. You just like know who to ask, when to ask, how to ask. It's the more street smart versus the book smart. I just think like really is a tool where that could really be enhanced, the emotional intelligence piece.
Oh, okay. So I got to ask you about your book and also on your website. It's called Burst and Flourish. Now, is that your approach towards poetry? Like you do a burst of creativity and then can you just define that?
Yeah. And let me just take one step back. So my first book of poetry is called And, okay. A-N-D, A Love Story Within. And to me is all abundance. There's enough for everybody and there's an inclusiveness to it. And it's figuring out who you are, starting with yourself. And a lot of times when I work with clients, change comes from the inside out. And it's hard. You got to be pretty courageous sometimes to look at some things from a different perspective. My second book, and what I name my company, Burst and Flourish. And flourish is like the French floral flourish. It's F-L-E-U-R-I-S-H. And that is more, it could be with creativity, but really it's the second part. It's the sequel where it's kind of once you know who you are, you really are very self-aware, your life kind of bursts forth. That's really what happened for me and really flourishes. And I always kept seeing a picture, like I kept seeing my fingers intertwined, almost like a floral, like a bloom opening up. And so that's why I changed it to the O of flourish to an E.
Oh, okay.
Everything's always so purposeful, right?
You did mention that you do work virtually. How do people work with you?
I do one-on-one coaching, whether that's a session or a day. I do also work with teams. So I do a lot of team building. So that's how the leaders start incorporating the poetry and to create that kind of safe environment. And then I also do speaking engagements and instructor-led trainings. Everybody has a different style. I just really want to honor what really works for each company and organization, what people are comfortable with.
Great. And you're located on the East Coast. Do you generally work with companies there or will you travel?
I do. I will travel. I'm based in northern New Jersey and the greater New York City area. Hopefully when things open up again, I could actually start traveling. But right now things are virtual. And actually, I've been very busy this summer with different team building events because people are always looking for virtual events that you can do and really bringing the team together. Because one thing I'm really focused on right now is how to lead a team remotely and how to create that connectiveness and belonging together. So that's been a real popular topic and event that I've been doing.
That is such an important thing right now. That's very cool. Where can people find you most of the time? Like on social media, on your website? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is on my website. And actually, I have a free gift on the website. One thing that I created was a quiz, an intuition quiz. Because a lot of people ask me and they just aren't aware of it. And so it takes about 2-3 minutes to do, but you get your results. And what's interesting is that once in a while, somebody will have very low score and not be intuitive. But really, again, they are. If you're coming from a low score, part of that is explaining the value and understanding what intuition is and how it could really change the decisions that you make in your life.
I believe that I'm very intuitive, but I know how to tap into that and I know what the signals are.
What's your signal? What does it feel like for you?
It's definitely like a gut feeling, and it's such a strong feeling that sometimes when there's impending doom, I get a little bit nervous because I have such an intuition for it.
I love it. And again, most creative types are very intuitive. I think that's what we bring to our art, to our creativity. So that is really about enhancing it and then just looking at different areas of your life. Are you using it throughout?
Very cool. In the show notes, we'll have links to the quiz and how to get a hold of you and also your book, which is very cool. So is that available online as well?
Yeah, so that you can either get through my website or just right on Amazon.
Okay.
If you type in, Michelle Kaplan, the books will come up.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being on the podcast today. That was very fun. Very fascinating. Such a different approach. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. It was really a pleasure. I really just want to end that life is art and that we're all artists. So I always just encourage people go make beautiful things and have fun doing it.
That's great. I love that. All right. This has been a delight. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Heather. Take care.
Hey, this is Heather. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you found value in the show, I'd really appreciate it if you gave me a rating on iTunes or just simply tell a friend about it. And if you're interested in learning more about my profit advising and coaching, please set up a discovery call by using the link in the show notes. All right. Thanks so much and see you next time.